All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring an incredibly personal, first-hand memoir from a man named Euripides Tamkalis. We're going to bridge the gap between everyday rural life and the cataclysmic events of the 20th century, and it's all told completely through the memories of a man who survived the whole shebang.
I confess that for as long as I stayed in Albania, I felt a permanent lump in my throat. That's a haunting reflection, isn't it? It perfectly sets the tone for our journey today. It's just a stark reminder of the visceral, inescapable terror of war. We aren't just looking at dates and battle maps here. We are stepping into the lived, emotional reality of a man pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance. When you think about the man behind this history, sitting thoughtfully by a window in his later years, it really humanizes the immense trials we're about to unpack. He actually wrote this memoir just to ensure his kids and grandkids would know what he endured, dedicating the whole thing to his family and his faith. This is his authentic voice and his legacy, captured right there on the page. Section 1, Early Life in Lesbos. The Roots of Resilience. Now, think about the sheer contrast between Euripides' upbringing and what was waiting for him. On one side, you have this intensely demanding agrarian life in Jinglo, right on the island of Lesbos. I mean, from the age of 6, he was being pulled out of school for months at a time just to help his dad with goat and sheep births. It was a life totally dictated by the seasons and just relentless physical labor. And on the flip side, a looming global conflict of a scale the world had literally never seen, slowly creeping its way toward Greece. In his original manuscript, Euripides actually notes that he gave up opportunities to travel abroad simply because his father needed him on the farm. He says he worked without objection because he was, in his own words, always obedient. It's fascinating, really, how this strict obedience and that grueling farm labor inadvertently built the exact physical and mental endurance he was going to need to survive. Section 2, The Descent into Hell, the Albanian Front. It's jarring how fast normal life can just vanish, right? He does his initial infantry service in 1933, goes back to farm life, and marries his first wife, Eleni, in 1939. Well, just months later, following the torpedoing of the Greek frigate Eli, Greece is pulled into World War II. Euripides, who had literally just received a telegram that his first son was born, is suddenly swept right away to the brutal front lines. His initial medical training was rough. I mean, he literally had to learn how to manually pump oxygen into pneumonia patients using a goat skin bag. But things escalated so terribly from there. He describes this incredibly tragic friendly fire incident where a Greek commander, Rokos, mistakenly ordered his troops to fire on their own men in the Albanian mountains. The heavy losses from that horrific mistake forced massive reinforcements, which pulled Euripides directly into the brutal combat zone of Rimini, Albania. Okay, so if you were a stretcher bearer, your survival came down to a few absolute terrifying rules. You operated at night to avoid enemy fire. Rule 1, maintain absolute silence. Rule 2, if an enemy searchlight sweeps over you, you freeze completely. And Rule 3, which is probably the most harrowing, in those freezing temperatures, the fallen soldiers became completely stiff. Stretcher bearers had to physically pull the body straight and untie their gaiters just to be able to strap them down. Euripides wrote, "At the slightest movement, they would open fire with machine guns. Our lives depended entirely on remaining motionless." The sensory nightmare of that is just hard to fathom. Imagine carrying the dead weight of a fallen comrade through thick, freezing mud in pitch darkness. You're hearing the agonizing groans of the wounded, but you know for a fact that a single slip, a single sound, or moving at all under a flare meant instant death for everyone. Section 3, The Long Walk Home. The Great Retreat. So let me ask you this. How do you survive a starving 400-kilometer march through enemy territory? Because as the German army occupies Greece, the border troops are forced to fall back. This wasn't some organized withdrawal. It was a desperate, unsupplied scramble for survival while the entire country collapsed around them. The sheer physical toll here is almost unimaginable. Euripides and his comrades walked for days and nights without sleep, actually holding onto each other in pairs just so they wouldn't collapse. They survived by picking up hardtack biscuits from the mud and just wiping them off to eat. At one point, to change out of his dirt-hardened clothes, Euripides was literally hiding inside a wide river drainage pipe. They were dealing with severe lice and basically surviving entirely on the scattered kindness of strangers in the villages they passed through. And escaping the advancing German army near Thessaloniki?
That was straight out of a movie. To avoid being thrown into prisoner camps, they literally jumped out of a moving truck. Local Greeks pulled them into a courtyard, fed them, stripped them of their khaki uniforms, and gave them civilian clothes to hide who they were. Euripides even talks about holding a hat to collect coins during a church fundraiser, just so he could afford a boat ticket home. After surviving a terrifying engine failure at sea in the middle of the night, they finally reached the island. He said, "When I stepped off, I remember kneeling down and kissing the soil. It was the soil of Mytilene." You can just feel the overwhelming relief in those words, right? He walked those final miles home barefoot because his boots had shredded his skin, completely covered in lice, just to see his wife Helen holding his young son outside the church. Section 4. Tragedy and Rebuilding. Occupation and Heartbreak. But getting home didn't mean the nightmare was over. Greece was plunged into absolute famine. Euripides notes that he returned hungry, naked, and barefoot. To feed his family, he had to clear overgrown land for a vegetable garden. He hired a worker to help build stone terraces, but the poor guy had to quit by noon because he was literally too weak from starvation to lift the stones. And money? It was worthless. Euripides had to pay his next worker entirely in olive oil because paper money had lost absolutely all of its value under the occupation. And the hardships just kept compounding. The occupiers were requisitioning animals all across Lesbos for transport. So Euripides faced this heartbreaking necessity of surrendering his family's heavily pregnant mare to the German army. He had to walk this struggling pregnant animal all the way to Mytilene, hand her over to a German officer, and didn't receive a single drachma in return. For a starving farming family, that was a absolutely devastating loss. This part is just gut-wrenching. Despite managing to rebuild the farm, his world was shattered again by profound personal loss. In 1946, his beloved wife Eleni died of meningitis, leaving him with 4 young orphaned children. The despair was so heavy that he briefly gave his infant daughter up for adoption, only to tearfully go back and get her days later. And then, years after that, his teenage son Stelios tragically drowned at sea while swimming with friends. It was a blow that caused Euripides to physically collapse. "My son, you left this world far too prematurely." Just let that sink in for a second. Think about the emotional weight of a father who survived all the horrors of the Albanian front, only to helplessly lose his wife to disease and his son to the sea. It's a level of heartbreak that really forces us to ask how anyone could possibly keep going. Section 5. Miracles and Legacy. A Foundation of Faith. In his own handwritten records, there's this incredible near-death experience. One night, while sleeping out in the fields to guard their harvest, thieves tried to rob a small local church. When Euripides called out to them in the dark, they fired a shotgun directly at him. The next morning, he found out that a thick tree branch right above his head had been completely sheared off by the blast. Literally, a few inches taller, and that would have been it. To him, these were unexplainable survivals. Early in his service, he narrowly escaped a brutal court-martial just because of the chance intervention of a sergeant. During the war, he and his squad left a wall a literal minute before a mortar shell completely obliterated it. For Euripides, surviving the freezing mud, the famine, and the gunfire wasn't just some stroke of luck. He actively credited his endurance to divine intervention from the saints and to a resilient inner spirit that just refused to break. Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and to this final, profound question. What sustains the human spirit when it has endured war, starvation, and the profound loss of family? Euripides' Tamkalis left us not just a record of history, but a true testament to the sheer, unbreakable will to live, to rebuild, and to remember. It's a story that absolutely challenges us to look at our own resilience. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey.